Charlie Kirk, The Empathy Deficit. Who's next? Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Charlie Kirk is certainly a polarizing figure. He has his supporters, he has his detractors, and the behaviour of some of those detractors has been thrown into sharp relief as a consequence of the reactions to his recent assassination. I've explained in my videos the behaviour behind certain of the reactions and what drives it, but it is also representative of something called the empathy deficit. In an increasingly interconnected, yet paradoxically isolated world, the concept of an empathy deficit is very much an actual thing. Emotional empathy, broadly defined as the ability to understand and share the feelings of others, to feel the feelings of others, is regarded by many as a cornerstone of human social interaction. The empathy deficit is a widespread reduction in this capacity to understand and feel the feelings of others at both individual and societal levels, leading to diminished compassion, increased conflict, and weakened community bonds. Studies have actually documented a notable decline in emotional empathy over recent decades. For instance, research from the University of Michigan Institute for Social Research revealed a 40% drop in empathy among college students compared to 1979, with the sharpest decline in the last decade of the study. Another analysis indicated a staggering 48% decrease in empathy levels among American students between 1979 and 2009. This phenomenon is not merely anecdotal. It manifests as a consequence of the narcissism epidemic, which I've explained in a separate video. Why is narcissism on the rise? And I'd encourage you to watch that video if you haven't already done so. It's also as a consequence of social polarization and a general erosion of kindness in daily life. You might wonder, why has this deficit emerged? And moreover, why does it persist? Well, leaving aside the existence of narcissism and psychopathy, where, as you know, there is a complete absence of emotional empathy, why is it that the general population is experiencing this empathy deficit? Historically, the presence of emotional empathy has, for some, provided an evolutionary advantage, as it resulted in the fostering of cooperation in small, tight-knit communities where survival depended on mutual understanding. In hunter-gatherer societies, for example, emotional empathy ensured resource sharing and conflict resolution. However, as civilizations grew more complex, emotional empathy became unevenly distributed, often limited to in-groups while excluding outsiders, a tendency which some call empathy bias. The modern empathy deficit can be traced back to the late 20th century, coinciding with rapid globalization, urbanization, and technological advancements. By the 1980s and 1990s, shifts in parenting and media consumption began altering how empathy was nurtured. For instance, increased emphasis on individual achievement, which naturally leans more towards narcissistic behaviours, over communal values, started eroding empathetic skills in younger generations. The turn of the millennium amplified this through the digital revolution, where virtual interactions replaced face-to-face ones, further widening the gap. One primary driver of the empathy deficit is technology, particularly the rise of social media and screen-based communication. Platforms like Facebook, X, Snapchat enable constant connectivity but often promote superficial engagements rather than deep emotional exchanges. It's very hard to be empathetic and feel for another human being if you can't read another person's emotions. You don't learn emotional literacy facing a screen, was a quote from one expert. Emojis and likes substitute for nuanced expressions, limiting the development of emotional intelligence. The digital echo chamber exacerbates this by algorithmically curating content that reinforces existing views, reducing exposure to diverse perspectives and fostering othering. In workplaces, tools like email and Slack have supplanted in-person meetings, diminishing opportunities for empathetic interactions. During the COVID-19 pandemic, reliance on virtual meetings and mass conversations further curtailed non-verbal cues essential for empathy, such as facial expressions and body language. This technological shift has created a generation less attuned to others' inner worlds, perpetuating the deficit as habits become ingrained. Societal factors also play a crucial role, which is something that we've seen particularly with regard to the response to Charlie Kirk, with political polarization and misinformation fueling division. In the United States, events like the coronavirus pandemic, racial injustices, economic insecurity have heightened tensions, making people more preoccupied with their own struggles and less receptive to others. A Gallup poll showed that about a third of Americans do not perceive race relations as problematic, indicating a failure to grasp particular groups' experiences. Polarization encourages viewing opponents as enemies rather than fellow humans, eroding emotional empathy across ideological lines. Misinformation, spread via social media, distorts realities and justifies indifference. For example, downplaying the pandemic's severity led some to ignore vulnerable populations' pleas for masking and distancing. Globally, this age of anger stems from perceived inequalities, where emotional empathy wanes as resentment grows. Such dynamics then create a feedback loop. Less emotional empathy leads to more conflict, which in turn deepens divisions. Economic pressures contribute significantly to the empathy deficit, as materialism and insecurity divert attention from communal concerns. In a hyper-competitive capitalist society, individuals prioritize personal success, viewing others as competitors rather than allies. Increasing materialism, where worth is measured by possessions, diminishes the value placed on emotional bonds. Economic insecurity, exacerbated by job losses, inflation, and gig economy instability, leaves people, in effect, beat down by life, with little emotional bandwidth to spare for others. In other words, little emotional empathy to bother about the problems of other individuals. As one observer noted, living life takes all of your resources. This results in altruism becoming a luxury that few can afford. On a psychological level, mental health issues are both a cause and effect of the empathy deficit. Naturally, as I've explained elsewhere, there's a rise in narcissistic behaviour, which naturally impairs upon empathy. Depression and anxiety, rampant in modern society owing to stresses like the pandemic, can make individuals inwardly focused, reducing their capacity to empathise. It's not the case that they don't have emotional empathy, but as I've repeatedly explained, external stressors result in them looking within themselves rather than looking towards others. It's also the case that there is the erosion of trust and openness. There's also an empathy gap which extends across temporal distances, where people struggle to empathise with future generations, for instance, about the arguments concerning climate change. Cultural shifts, including changing parenting methods, have long-term implications. Modern parenting often emphasises self-esteem and achievement over social skills, with less unstructured playtime for children to learn empathy through peer interactions. Helicopter parenting, which is often seen with certain mid-range narcissists, or excessive screen time from a young age hinders emotional development. Additionally, a cultural rise in individualism, prioritising me over we, has normalised self-centred behaviours, as seen in the concurrent increase in narcissistic behaviours. Media portrayals of success as solitary triumphs reinforce this, while collectivist cultures historically maintain higher emotional empathy levels. The persistence of the emotional empathy deficit lies in its self-reinforcing nature. As emotional empathy declines, societies become more fragmented, leading to policies and norms that favour division over unity. Think, for instance, anti-immigration sentiments or welfare cuts. This fragmentation, of course, also favours those that have no emotional empathy, for it makes the issue of controlling the masses more easy. Those that are affected by being narcissists or psychopaths, as you know from my work, require control through the prime aims or the necessary triad. The erosion of emotional empathy means that individuals are more likely, en masse, to be easier to control because they have less concern for looking out for one another. Paradoxically, on a one-on-one instance, the narcissist naturally still wants to ensnare someone with emotional empathy, for that emotional empathy is utilized towards the narcissist and not others. The narcissist looks to hijack that. But the empathy deficit is something that has occurred, and it's worth understanding the variety of factors that exist in relation to it, because the instance around the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and particularly the reactions thereafter, are demonstrative of the empathy deficit. And I'm going to show you now a clear example of that. These are a range of comments that appeared on Blue Sky that somebody has harvested. The question was posed, who next after Charlie Kirk? In other words, Kirk has been assassinated, who would you like to see assassinated next? This is just a selection of comments which demonstrates the presence of the empathy deficit. Now, undoubtedly, there will be a handful of individuals amongst those responses who are narcissists, who are devoid of emotional empathy, and that is what guides their responses. But many of those individuals will not be narcissists. But for them to, first of all, consider that it is appropriate to declare that somebody else ought to be assassinated in the immediate aftermath of an actual assassination, and to put forward the names of individuals simply because they disagree with the views that they express, is demonstrative of an absence of emotional empathy. And this is a clear example, as one might get, of the prevailing empathy deficit in society. You will see that common names appear: Joe Rogan, J.K. Rowling, Ben Shapiro. All of those individuals are known for advancing views which many people regard as common sense, and others regard them as individuals who advance hate-filled rhetoric. Naturally, it depends on your own perspective as to where you stand in relation to them. But irrespective of that, the fact is that these individuals listed in this harvesting of views show individuals who see no difficulty in calling for the execution of Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, J.K. Rowling, and Joe Rogan. That to them it does not occur that not only might this be viewed as some form of criminal activity, but the very fact that they place no value on the lives of these individuals and deem that it is appropriate not only to consider that they ought to be killed because they express a particular view, but they go so far as to advocate for their assassination in a public forum, is demonstrative of the presence of this empathy deficit. And the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the reactions thereafter provide me with an opportunity to throw into sharp relief this empathy deficit, which is exploited by certain individuals, utilized to their advantage, and provides me with an opportunity to demonstrate to you that the concept of emotional empathy is a real concept, but it's being diminished. There is a clear empathy deficit, and if you were wondering what is behind many of these views, I've explained on an individual level why people have advanced the views that they have in an earlier video, but en masse, a lot of it is driven by the fact that there is an empathy deficit. That empathy deficit may well be as a consequence of the fact that the individual has no empathy to begin with, because they are, for instance, a narcissist, but more usually, the empathy deficit has arisen in people that have some emotional empathy, but they are not exhibiting it towards certain hate figures for reasons that I have explained elsewhere. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.